Welcome to A Healthier, Happier You, the people working to make it happen. I'm Evan J. Charlton from Luxhammer, where we help food and beverage, health and wellness, and personal care companies grow. Today, I'm joined by Ed Rogers, CEO of Bonumose, a company revolutionizing the natural sweetener industry. Ed, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Evan, for being interested in what we're doing, and look forward to talking.
So for our listeners who aren't familiar, what exactly is Tagatose?
Sure. So Tagatose is a sweet plant material. It occurs in nature in very tiny quantities, but it's found in some fruits like apples and pineapples and some grains. It's called a rare monosaccharide because it's very, very rare. And yet it's got a sweetness that's very desirable. It's so rare that it cannot be harvested, but it can be made from other materials. And it's been on the market for probably 30 years or so. It was originally made from lactose, so from milk sugar, but that's a bit of a complicated process. And I don't mean to demean anybody else's technologies, but it's a kind of a complicated process that results in a high cost. And my co-founder developed a way of making Tagatose from abundant plant material, starch, that allows for it to be made in high purities and high conversion rates and at low cost. So Tagatose is a sugar alternative, and I'll talk some more about some of the aspects of it.
What led Bonumose to focus on Tagatose production?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a little. I guess the reason is because of the attractive attributes of Tagatose. And it was a little bit of serendipity, but my co-founder, Dr. Daniel Wichelecki, who is the inventor of our process, had some specialized knowledge about enzymes that would allow for Tagatose to be made at large scale. And his technology is a unique way of using enzymes. Enzymes are something that are common in food, cheese, many other things. Sometimes they're eaten and sometimes they're used to make food that is eaten. They're in your mouth. They're all over the place. Enzymes, when it comes to food production, typically are used pretty inefficiently, but Dan was able to combine enzymes in a way that allow for them to, it's almost like overcoming gravity, the way that they can be used. They allow for much, much higher conversion yields, so a much more efficient process. That combined with the fact that Tagatose has such attractive features had us focusing on Tagatose. Now, it just so happens that what he invented can be extended to make other things, but of all the things that it can be used to make, Tagatose has the most opportunity for positively affecting public health and being a commercial opportunity for us as well as for our value chain partners. And again, I'll go into some more about why Tagatose is great or why we think it's great, but you may have learned already from this very short interview that I can drone, and I want to give you a chance to ask questions and not just go on and on and on.
No, I love it. I love hearing all about it. So I'm curious, how does your enzymatic process make Tagatose production more cost effective?
Yeah. All right. So this is going to get kind of complicated, but happy to go into it. The way that Tagatose was made in the past is that lactose could be taken from whey, U-H-E-Y. And it's in whey, but whey, it's in there in an impure form. So once the lactose was purified out of the whey, the lactose could be split into two molecules, one called glucose, which is a fairly common type of sugar, and the other called galactose. Lactose can be converted to Tagatose using an enzyme, but that conversion yield is typically pretty low, like 40% conversion. And it's because of the way that enzymes typically work. So if you trace it all the way back to the beginning lactose, you're only getting about 20% yield tops from the lactose. And the lactose, like I said, it's found in whey, but you have to purify it out of the whey. What makes Dan's invention different is that, so compared to the way enzymes are typically used, like in the galactose to Tagatose process, there's an enzyme that will convert galactose to Tagatose. But it's a reversible reaction. It also goes the other way. It'll create Tagatose from galactose. And so it reaches a balance. And it's a balance that slightly favors galactose. And so that's why you only get about 40% yield. Another example of way enzymes are used similar to that are when high fructose corn syrup is made. Glucose is converted to fructose, but that enzyme that does that conversion also goes the other direction and converts fructose to glucose, so it reaches a balance. And again, it's about a 40% conversion. And it's because those are reactions that go both ways. They're reversible reactions. And this is where Dan's breakthrough comes in, where he was able to combine several enzymes, so not just a single enzyme, but combine enzymes in a way that creates an irreversible enzymatic reaction. So when we start with the starch, and it's not exactly starch, but just for ease of description, we'll say starch, and it can come from corn, wheat, potato, many other things. When we apply our enzymes, we get almost 90% conversion. So we get about 85% conversion or higher. So double what you normally see, because it's an irreversible enzymatic reaction. So it's like, imagine if I poured water on this table here, and give me a minute, I'll probably will spill water on this table. But if I were to pour water on this table, it would just sort of go across the surface. All right. But if it drips over the edge, it's not going to come back up to the top of the table. And that's the way our enzyme reaction works. Once it goes over the edge to Tagatose, it doesn't go back to, in that case, the water. So that's what's really unique about his invention. That's the first thing that's unique about his invention. And the second thing is that it can be deployed in the same type of equipment that is used today to make sweeteners at enormous bulk scales. Without having to create new equipment and new plants, his invention can plug into existing facilities in a way to make Tagatose from cheap starting materials, to make something that is truly good for people and that people will love to eat.
So what makes Tagatose unique compared to other sugar alternatives?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about the positives of Tagatose. I'll also talk about the positives of sugar itself. I don't mean to undermine other sweeteners, because there's a lot of great ones that are out there. And frankly, when it comes to sugar reduction, the need is great, the opportunity is great, and there will be a lot of winners. But we think, and others in the field think, that Tagatose has a chance to be among the biggest of winners because of how closely it mimics sugar. So let's talk about sugar. Sugar, it provides sweetness. It's naturally occurring from plants. It's abundant and it's cheap. And it does more than provide sweetness. It also provides bulk to food. So imagine, making cookies. There's the structure of the cookies largely comes from the sugar. Same thing with candies. In beverages, sugar provides a nice mouthfeel. Sugar in ice creams helps depress the freezing point, so you have creamy ice cream. Sugar has antimicrobial properties. It helps reduce, it does something called reducing water activity, which leads to longer shelf life. So sugar has been used for generations on preserving food. And so sugar's a great thing. It's more than just sweet. Problem is excess consumption of sugar. And when I say sugar, I'm usually talking about sucrose, cane sugar, beet sugar, that type of thing. There are many other sugars like high fructose corn syrup and glucose and fructose, but these things, when consumed in excess, have been linked to a variety of health problems: obesity, diabetes, tooth decay, poor gut health, all sorts of things, inflammation, many other things. And I'm not saying it's only caused by sugar, but there's a linkage there. So here's why Tagatose is great. Tagatose, first of all, is good for you. It's not that it's just removing the negatives associated with sugar, but it contributes positive health benefits. Now, I should say some of these statements, even though they are true, are not necessarily approved by the FDA, which is a great oddity in our regulatory scheme that companies like mine can't say, are disallowed from saying truthful statements about their products. So, there's a First Amendment issue here, but Tagatose is a prebiotic. And by the way, there's documentation for all of this. Tagatose acts like dietary fiber. So it goes into the large intestine. It mostly bypasses the small intestine, so it's not absorbed into the bloodstream. It goes to the large intestine, where it feeds the microbiota, the microbes that are in your large intestine that are beneficial for health. Those produce things called short-chain fatty acids, which are beneficial for health. Gut health is important to immunity. So there's all these things that are going on in the gut that are so important, that fiber benefits, and Tagatose benefits just the way fiber benefits. And now this will be brought up again when we talk about the labeling. Tagatose also is low glycemic. So it's a glycemic index of 3 on a scale of 1 to 100, glucose being 100, sugar being around 70. And so it will not spike blood sugar levels. It will not spike insulin. It actually has the effect of moderating these levels and even inhibiting the effect of other high glycemic foods. So it's got that benefit. So safe for diabetics, but also safe for everybody else that wants to manage their blood sugar, including me. And by the way, I'm speaking as somebody who loves sugar. I hate it, but I love it. With most people, it's probably a love-hate relationship. With Tagatose, it's all love. Other thing about Tagatose is that it's low calorie. So it's got about a little over a third of the calories of sugar, regular sugar, 1.5 calories per gram compared to 4 for sugar. Lastly, that I'll mention, there's actually a lot more. Tagatose is safe for teeth. It's not only safe, it's actually good for teeth. It breaks up dental plaque. There's an interesting study from Japan that showed that Tagatose was found in the saliva of people with good oral health. Not because they had consumed Tagatose, it was just something naturally in their saliva. So it has this beneficial effect for the oral microbiome. Now, we're not going to market Tagatose as, the sweetener made from spit, because it's not made from spit. But, just my point is that it's got these naturally, inherently good properties. All this is documented over the course of about 30 years. So Tagatose has these health properties. Meanwhile, it has the sweetness of regular sugar. It's 92% is sweet. So you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. In fact, some people who are sensitive to sweetness have told us it's actually got a better sweetness because it's not too sweet. And sugar to them is too sweet. So Tagatose has got a very desirable sweetness, a very desirable flavor. So it doesn't have bitter notes or off flavors or anything like that. By the way, it also caramelizes and it creates interesting flavors when used in cooked food. On the sweetness level, there's some great sweeteners out there that are called high potency sweeteners, stevia, monk fruit, and some of the fake ones. These have a really good place, particularly in beverages, but there's two shortcomings with them. One is they're super, super sweet, sometimes thousands of times sweeter than sugar, and therefore they usually require some sort of additional ingredient to match the bulking properties of sugar. Imagine baking a batch of cookies that required a cup of sugar. Well, you use a quarter teaspoon of stevia, it's not going to turn out right. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that sometimes the sweetness, it's called the sweetness curve, the way sweetness comes on and it lingers, it can create maybe some undesirable flavors. Tagatose does not have those shortcomings. And in fact, Tagatose blends really well with these high intensity sweeteners to kind of even out those issues. So Tagatose can be used for the bulking material for other sweeteners. It can make stevia and other ones taste better. And so in beverages in particular, it's really interesting to think about using a high intensity sweetener, like maybe a sweet protein also, not just stevia and monk fruit, and Tagatose, achieve 100% sugar reduction, achieve the fiber-like benefits of Tagatose. So you got the taste, the flavor, and you got the functionality, the bulking properties of Tagatose. So you have the health without sacrificing taste or texture, and with our process, our cost is competitive compared to other sugar alternatives.
That's great. That's pretty amazing. So what key partnerships have you developed to scale production?
Yeah. And by the way, all those things I said about Tagatose are true even when made from other methods. It's just that our method has these special aspects that I mentioned before that allow for it to be scaled up globally without having to reinvent value chains. Or this is a drop-in. It's a drop-in for producing Tagatose, and it's a drop-in for using Tagatose in a food production environment or using it home in your coffee or your oatmeal or, chocolate chip cookies. So because of these attributes of Tagatose and because of the things that I mentioned about our technology, we've got some great partnerships we're very happy with. The first of which is a little bit counterintuitive, is a sugar company. So the largest cane sugar marketer and refiner in the world is called ASR Group. You've never heard of them. You might have heard of C&H Sugar at your grocery store since you're on the West Coast. Also, Domino Sugar on the East Coast. They also have the #1 brand in Canada, the #1 brand in the UK, and I think the #1 brand in Portugal. Fantastic company. Every one of them is enthused about Tagatose and is putting more effort into the marketing of Tagatose than I ever could have hoped for. So it's counterintuitive because you might think, well, why would a sugar company want something that could replace sugar? I think first of all, these are good people. Second of all, they recognize that their customers want alternatives and they would like to be involved in supplying those alternatives to their customers. So we've been working with them for a long time. We also have, as one of our strategic investors, a Japanese confectionery and food ingredient company that I cannot name because they're just very private in the way they do business. We're very, very proud of them. We wish we could name them. It's a publicly traded company in Japan, but we've been working with them actually longer than we've been working with the sugar company. The Hershey company is another investor of ours. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but you can assume that They must have liked something about Tagatose when they decided to get involved with us. By the way, these are minority investors. They do not control our decisions. They are very good advisors and very good partners. Symrise is another strategic partner. Now, Symrise is not a household name to you or your viewers, but it is one of the top flavor companies in the world. And they've known about Tagatose for about 30 years. They got involved really early on when it was starting to be made many, many years ago. They like the fact that it has this great flavor and carries flavor in a really interesting way. So it can be a carrier for the flavors that they use to help foods be more attractive. And I'm not talking about artificial flavors. I'm talking about naturally derived flavors. So again, nobody really knows about Symrise. It's not a household name, but they're in probably products that you and your viewers would use every day. And those are the big ones that are strategic investors. We also announced a partnership last year with a company called Roquette, which is a major player in food ingredients, in starch, but also in healthy food ingredients, fibers and proteins and different things. And they have the ability to scale up Tagatose globally. And so that's what we think is on the horizon. We have a dialogue with pretty much every food company in the world, one of which, and I will not name who it is, it's not one of the ones I named already, but one of the very large food companies called around to all the starch companies to let them know, we think what Bonumose is doing with Tagatose is very interesting, and we think you ought to get involved with them. And that led to a series of intriguing discussions that ultimately led to this relationship we've had with Roquette.
That's really incredible and great support from the community. But can you walk us through the FDA labeling situation?
Yeah. And let me just point out that we're having this discussion on February 13th of 2025. Okay. So maybe by the time this is viewed, things will have changed. Just today, I'm not wanting this to be a political statement, but just today, the Senate confirmed Robert F. Kennedy as the new Secretary of Health and Human Services. His focus, as he said, is going to be on diet-related diseases, on addressing chronic diet-related diseases. And these diseases, diet-related means it's caused by our food. One of the tragedies of this country, but also the world, but even more so in this country, is that we spend more on treating diet-related diseases than we do on the food itself. And we spend way too little on prevention. And Tagatose can play a big role here, because if sugar is bad for you, or if people want to reduce their sugar for whatever reason, Tagatose can be a solution without them having to sacrifice the taste and texture like we talked about earlier. So with the FDA, this may become a filibuster answer. So, bear with me or wave your hands if you want me to take a break. Sugar, it contributes to diet-related diseases, according to most people, at least excess consumption of sugar. On the nutrition facts label that is on every food, candy bars, cereals, soft drinks, ice cream, whatever, I think most people are familiar. You turn over to the back, there's a nutrition facts label. It's mandated by the FDA. Broadly speaking, that lists carbohydrates, proteins, and fat. Those are the three big macronutrients. Carbohydrates are further broken down into sugars and even further added sugars. So there's some sugars that are inherent in food, and there's some sugars that are added to food to make something sweeter. But carbohydrates are broken down into sugars and fiber. And then, there's typically other carbohydrates. Well, for some reason, the FDA says Tagatose must be counted under sugars. Now, mind you, it has none of the health problems associated with sugar. It has positive health benefits as recognized by the FDA. I mean, they admit to all of it. It's an approved food ingredient and has been for many, many years. But their rule says that Tagatose has to be labeled as sugar. And if Tagatose is labeled as sugar, food companies will not use it. Every food company you can name has told us, we will use Tagatose if it's not labeled as sugar. It just makes life way too difficult for their own marketing efforts. Because not only is it going to confuse people when they turn over and look at it on the label, it also affects what they're allowed to say on the front of the label regarding, is it healthy? Is it low in sugar? And a variety of other things. So it would create mass confusion among consumers. And there's limited space on packaging to describe all this. And so it's just a deal killer. So the FDA effectively keeps it off the market. By the way, this could also be dangerous to diabetics. If you are a diabetic and you're eating something with Tagatose in it, and you think that it has sugar because it's labeled as sugars under sugar grams, you might take a prophylactic insulin shot. Well, you might then go into insulinic shock because you're not going to get the glucose load, the glycemic load from the Tagatose. So it's a danger to some people. The misleading labeling is a danger. In addition, Tagatose really ought to be labeled as a fiber because that's how the body treats it. And the FDA will not let it be labeled as a fiber. They have this arbitrary rule that a fiber's got to be a certain polymer length. And if it's not that length, well, it doesn't matter how healthy it is, you can't label it as a fiber. So, in 2018, almost exactly 7 years ago, we filed a citizen petition with the FDA to change the labeling, to allow Tagatose to be exempted from sugars. And then we later followed up asking them to allow it to be counted under fiber. Well, in 2022, they denied our citizen petition. 2 years earlier, they had granted a similar citizen petition for something called allulose, which is a very good sweetener, has many of the same properties of Tagatose, not quite as good on the healthy front, not quite as good on the taste front, but still very good sweetener. No negatives that I'm aware of in terms of its health benefits. Very, very similar to Tagatose in its chemical structure. And the FDA, at the time they exempted allulose, they enunciated 3 criteria that, okay, we're exempting it because it doesn't spike blood sugar levels, it doesn't cause tooth decay, and it has much fewer calories than regular sugar. Well, in the case of Tagatose, it doesn't cause tooth decay. That's actually enshrined in federal regulations already. It does not spike blood glucose levels. Absolutely provable. The FDA is kind of weird on that because they may be beholden to certain drug companies, but in Europe, you can make a labeling claim that Tagatose has a blood glucose lowering effect. So first 2 criteria, check. Third criteria, Tagatose has 63% fewer calories than sugar. I think most honest people would admit that that's much fewer than sugar. So we meet the 3 criteria, but they made the exact opposite decision. So in May of 2022, they made the exact opposite decision. Recognizing that speaking to them was not as pleasant as speaking to you or most human beings, and getting nowhere with them, we filed a lawsuit against the FDA. And last August, we won. A federal court, by the way, an Obama appointee, and Biden was in office at the time, but an Obama appointee ruled that the FDA failed to follow their own rules in how they treated Tagatose. The legal standard is arbitrary and capricious, which is under something called the Administrative Procedures Act. So he ruled that they were arbitrary and capricious and had violated the Administrative Procedures Act, and he sent it back to the FDA to correct their misdeeds. FDA did not appeal that decision. They had 60 days to appeal. They did not appeal. Here we are, how many months later, and the FDA still has not changed the labeling. We think that the new FDA leadership gives us hope for consumers out there because we think the new FDA leadership will recognize that this is a no-brainer.
What impact has the 2024 court ruling had so far?
Well, it's had the impact of that we have a disinterested party, a federal judge who's been on the bench for a long time, I don't know how long, say Bonumose was right and that everything we've been saying all along about the FDA being wrong was correct. And so it has given hope to us and to consumers and to food companies that change is coming. The problem is that the change has not yet come. And until it actually does come, there's still the uncertainty. And that labeling has had a very big negative effect on us and our ability to help treat and prevent diet-related diseases. So it's helped. It's a vindication. It was a long 34-page opinion, really raking them over the coals. If I had been in the FDA, I'd be embarrassed. Still, here we are almost 6 months later, and the rule has not changed.
Wow. So while this is going on, how are you helping food manufacturers navigate this regulatory uncertainty?
Well, we're telling them that we think change is coming, and we are trying to reach out to the incoming leadership to hopefully let them see that this should be a priority for them and that it's a pretty easy decision. They just can follow the court ruling and fix the past mistakes of the FDA. But there are lots of other competing priorities, and so we don't know that we will be able to get their attention in the way that we hope to. But right now, the FDA is being an impediment to a common sense solution to diet-related disease, and they ought to be ashamed of themselves.
Yeah, well, hopefully things will change for the better. So changing subjects a little bit, what are your main growth targets for this year?
Yeah, so we are hoping to get that ruling changed, and that will remove the only roadblock to growth in the United States. We will believe that will lead to a larger scale production through one of our partners, which is, it really makes sense for somebody with more manufacturing experience and access to starch, which is the feedstock, to make this at large scale. And it's capable of being made in a bulk way globally. And to do that fast in a way that serves consumers and the food companies, it's probably a better party than Bonumose to do that scale up. Meanwhile, what we will do with our plant here, where we started production, and that, like I said, 24 hours a day, 7-day a week operation, it can be redeployed to make other interesting ingredients that are not necessarily sugar alternatives, but are more dietary supplements that can be made using the same feedstock, the same equipment, most of the same enzymes, and have a higher selling point. So we've got some partnerships that a really good partnership we'll be announcing soon, but I don't want to steal the thunder of our commercial partner, so I won't go into any more details. And then, like I said, at the very, very beginning, this is a platform technology, so there's a lot of other things that we can make, and we plan on undergoing the R&D steps that are needed to tweak the enzyme blends that will allow these other things to be made.
How are you planning to scale production to meet demand?
That's going to be probably through partners, so starch companies that have access to the feedstock and have access to the production equipment. And then also we have distribution partners, some of which I mentioned earlier.
So what's your approach to entering international markets?
Yeah, so the company that I mentioned earlier, the starch company Roquette, and by the way, every company that I've mentioned here is our relationship with them has been mentioned publicly by them. So I'm not, revealing anything I shouldn't reveal and not just dropping names. They're a French-based company. So they have production assets in Europe, in Southeast Asia, as well as the United States. We have other relationships in Southeast Asia. Tagatose is something that can be used globally. Sugar is used globally. Tagatose can be used globally. And we're fortunate to have good relationships globally. More than likely, the sales effort will be done by our commercial partners as opposed to us. We will support that with the nutrition research that we have compiled about Tagatose, where we're pursuing additional nutrition research. We will provide access to that. And then we will support through our interface with various regulatory bodies.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So what's your strategy for building consumer awareness? Are you doing that through them, or are you planning on doing your own?
We actually launched in January of 2025 B2C sales of Tagatose through Amazon. And we will plan on doing more of that. It's really baby stepping into it because we don't have a huge marketing budget. So we're just making Tagatose available. If you went to Amazon and searched Tagatose, it's probably the first product that would come up. We're selling it under the brand Traceavelt, which is a French term that I'm probably pronouncing wrong. So by the way, that excuses your mispronunciation of Bonumose if you ever mispronounce it, which you haven't so far. But and the French speakers that I know, every time I say Traceavelt, they tell me I'm saying it wrong, but it means very slender, very slim. So that's available today. We have made that here in Virginia. We package it here in Virginia. And when we get more time, we'll put some effort into marketing that. The reason for doing that, there's several reasons for doing it. One is we've had a lot of requests for Tagatose to be sold to consumers. And so we're offering it at a good price compared to other alternatives. I personally use it at home every single day. Number two is that we want customers to be familiar with Tagatose when they see it in their foods, so when they see it on the label. And some very smart people say, including I think I recently heard Dr. Mark Hyman say this, I think it was him, if there's an ingredient in your food that you can't find, in your pantry, stay away. Well, Tagatose is something you can find in your pantry. It's something that will be familiar to customers in terms of how it tastes and how you use it in food and the flavor and the bulking properties and all that. So it's not something to be worried about. And we will see it helping. That we think will help B2B sales. But we are baby stepping into it because, like I said, don't have a large marketing budget at this point.
I'm curious, just in general, how do you see the sugar alternative market evolving?
Well, I think everybody who comments on this and looked at this says that sugar alternatives will grow in market share faster than sugar itself and other traditional sweeteners, and faster than the growth of global populations. And like I said earlier, there'll be a lot of winners in sugar reduction, and there's a lot of ways to sweeten foods. There's not a lot of things that come close to mimicking the taste and flavor and functionality and other properties of sugar that I discussed earlier. And that's why we think that Tagatose is well positioned to be among the biggest of winners, and frankly will probably be around 100 years from now and continuously growing steadily and steadily. I do not see it ever replacing sugar, and probably never becoming a majority of the sweeteners that are sold. Sugar is cheap and abundant, and when used responsibly is something that can, if people want to use it, it can make them happy, and so they ought to have the choice. With Tagatose, it being globally scalable and having the health properties and other properties that I mentioned, we are able to provide a healthy choice.
If all goes well with the FDA, what milestones are you focused on achieving in the next 12 to 18 months?
Getting Tagatose made at the scale that can serve global beverage and confectionery and ready-to-eat cereal and other food companies. That's the biggest one. That is a blocking element to that, or a roadblock to that, is the labeling. We'll of course launch the production of that other ingredient that I referred to, but I want to kind of keep that on the down low for now in respect of our commercial partner, and then make R&D progress on the other things. There is such an enormous opportunity with Tagatose that it necessitates having others involved in the value chain of moving it from concept to somebody's mouth. And so fortunately, we have a head start with a lot of top-notch strategic partners, and it can move fast.
Yeah, it sounds like education will be a huge factor in all of this.
I think so. I mean, consumers are naturally leery or wary of the next new thing. But fortunately, Tagatose has been around for a long, long time, has regulatory approvals, has ample literature discussing the health benefits. The judge himself talked about all of the scientific papers that have been produced on the health benefits of Tagatose. There's some new things that have just come out this week that we're going to be announcing that relate to how Tagatose can even act as a therapeutic in relation to certain problematic diseases that are unable to be addressed through antibiotics. So that's pretty exciting, and that's all part of the education process, as is the B2C efforts that we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And so what role do you see Tagatose playing in addressing global health challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of sugar reduction, for one. And I don't think, I'm not one who says that any ounce of sugar is poison. Some people might say that, but I think sugar, if used responsibly, can be part of a diet. I would say people don't need sugar, but hey, I mean, it makes people happy. So Tagatose can replicate that, can blend with sugar. I think Tagatose will be able to reduce sugar in a way that meets the goals of all public health entities. I think if you look at various groups, they talk about if we could just reduce sugar by about 20% or 30%, Tagatose can do that. I think it will also become recognized for how it adds health benefits. So one of the large beverage companies told us this is not just a sweetener, it's also a fiber. So it adds the prebiotic benefits that are important. So I think Tagatose will become known more and more as something that it could be part of your daily eating regimen in a way that contributes positive health benefits. So it's kind of an interesting concept. You could have the delight of sugar while having the health benefits of fiber and other good things. And that is all good for public health, and we sure do need it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. That's it for today's episode of Healthier, Happier You, the people working to make it happen. Huge thank you to Ed Rogers for sharing his insights and the amazing work Bonumose is doing to help people live healthier lives. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could benefit. And if you're a brand or business making an impact in health, wellness, or personal care, we'd love to help you grow. Connect with me at luxammer.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay healthy, stay happy, and keep making a difference.
Thanks, Evan.